let's talk about tax. You're a big fan of the fair tax.
Yes.
Can you explain why?
It's because the fair tax is the fairest tax we could come up with, because it moves the decision of taxes from the government to the individual. Because with the fair tax, the consumer determines his or her taxes at the cash register, not the government. And secondly, the fair tax would eliminate the messed up tax code that we have that is strangling this economy. And secondly, it allows bureaucrats to pick winners and losers. That's not how the tax code is supposed to work. So I like the fair tax because it is a consumption tax and a national retail sales tax that replaces all federal income taxes, and it replaces the payroll tax, so it brings in the same amount of revenue, but you bring it in through the cash register.
Now, of course, we've got a Treasury Secretary that got messed up with the tax code himself and couldn't get a regular job in the Treasury, but he's Secretary of the Treasury somehow. I don't know how that works, but there you go. Let me ask you this. As President, would you sign a fair tax bill if it arrived in the Oval Office without an appeal of the 16th Amendment?
No.
Unequivocal answer.
Because in the current legislation, there is language in there that requires repeal of the 16th Amendment before the fair tax can go into effect.
You're talking about H.R. 25?
Yes,
is that
sir.
What you're referring to?
H.R. 25.
And of course, H.R. 25 does have what I like to call an escape clause in it. It's actually Section 401, which says that in the event that the 16th Amendment isn't repealed.
Correct.
But isn't it fair to say it's extremely unlikely that the 16th Amendment will be repealed? And therefore, isn't a fair tax just a kind of headline-grabbing, sounds like a great idea thing?
No, I don't think so, and here's why. Because if you look at the difference today versus 10 or 15 years ago, you have the power of the internet and you've got the Tea Party citizens movement. Those two dynamics are redefining the political landscape. And we will be, if we generate enough people interest, enough voters interest in it, because I have a guiding principle. When the people understand it, they will support it and demand it. And because of the power of the internet, because of the Tea Party citizens movement, I believe that it does have a great chance of becoming law.
Let me ask you, what is a prebate? It's not in the dictionary, and why is it necessary?
A prebate is the amount of the sales tax that you would pay, a family would pay on basic necessities before you go to the grocery store or before you buy clothes. In other words, that's calculated into the amount of money that would be raised. In other words, don't penalize a family before they go to the store and give it to them as a rebate. I renamed it a prebate. And then the author of the legislation, former Congressman John Linder, they started going with the terminology prebate. It's always been intended that you would send this to every family in America at the beginning of the month, such that as they buy retail goods, they already have the tax money in hand.
Okay. Isn't the point of the fair tax that it's based solely on people's ability to pay? So if Donald Trump, we can talk freely about him now, that he's no longer a candidate or even a potential one. If Donald Trump wants to go out and buy $1 million yacht,
yes,
God bless him, and he goes and pays sales tax on it, and in actual fact can't avoid it because it's sales tax. And I'm not saying Donald Trump's doing anything illegal, because he's not. He's just hiring very high-powered accountants and getting around some taxes.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, the equivalent for me would probably be a rowboat, frankly, and I go out and buy my rowboat, and I'll pay
the same percentage.
The same percentage, and obviously a much smaller dollar amount. So why are we prebating anything if it's called the fair tax, based solely on the ability to pay? Because
what part of the concept of the fair tax is that people should not have to pay a tax on basic necessities. And that's why it is collected and given back based solely on family size, not based upon income, whether you're rich or poor. But here's another big advantage of the fair tax. No tax on used goods. For example, a family that's struggling that wants to buy a used car, they pay no tax on it. They want to buy a used home, they pay no tax on it. So in that regard, it helps to leverage your income by buying used goods and services. If my dad had been able to buy a home, having worked 3 jobs, he would have been able to buy that home a lot earlier if he could have bought a used home without having to save up enough money to buy a brand new home. I'm just going to ask you one more question. I mean, if the point is to avoid these essential items, why not simply, the technology exists to not charge it on milk and bread and eggs and
maybe cheese that's not exotic cheese. I mean, the technology's there in the stores to not charge it. So why are we actually going to the trouble of, as far as I can see, you're sending out money?
You're sending out money because,
why?
number one, that's the simplest thing to do. And number two, if you start making a list of things that you're going to say you're not going to charge the tax on, then all of the retailers in America are going to have to change all of their systems to identify those items. And then secondly, then you open it up for bureaucrats to start adding items to it over time. By sending it back, it's calculated based upon a basket of goods, a basket of services for a family based upon family size. Okay. So by sending it out, it is literally easiest and simplest to do.
I said it was the last question, and I lied, because that's just created a new one. We see this with welfare, don't we? We see the welfare money and food stamps being spent on donut rings and ho-hos and actually, in some cases, crack cocaine.
Yes.
Okay. This just strikes me as a way that we're just going to encourage that. If we're sending it out in this fashion, as opposed to simply not taxing these essential items. I mean, my experience of it is VAT in England. It doesn't exist on food.
Right. Well, first of all, I absolutely object to any sort of VAT, value-added tax. I absolutely object to that. Now, You're absolutely right. It does allow for some people to abuse that prebate and not use it for what it's intended for. But I would rather trust the majority of the American people who are going to use it for that purpose rather than not do the right thing, because we know we're going to have a few people who will abuse the system. So I have a trust in the American people. The majority of the people are going to use it for the right reasons. And that's why I would rather do that than to try and put in a much more complicated system.
Okay. Clearly, I wasn't born in the United States. You may have been able to spot that,
really?
But I am a very proud and patriotic citizen.
I thought you just had a southern accent.
I do, South London. I am, however, a very proud and patriotic, very good citizen.
Great.
And I came in through the front door.
Great.
Immigration is in desperate need of reform. What would be your policy on immigration?
My approach would be the following. First of all, immigration isn't one problem, it's four problems. Number one, we need to secure the border. Number two, enforce the laws that are there, the ones that you came in under. Number three, secure the border, enforce the laws that are there. Number three, promote the path to citizenship that already exists. We don't need a new path. And then the fourth one, what do we do about the illegals that are already here? Empower the states to do what the federal government will not do, can't do, and won't do. Empower the states, because the situation in every state is a little bit different. Let them deal with it. If we attack those four problems, we will be able to make significant progress on immigration.
Okay, but the point is surely that you can't do anything with immigration reform at all until you fix job one, which is the border.
Exactly. Exactly. And the federal government cannot fix it.
No.
I believe the states can. Arizona should not have been sued for what it was trying to do. They should have received an award. How about a peace prize?
Well, that's a good idea, yeah. They give those out fairly easily these days. Maybe you'd go for breaking, if you became president, you'd go for breaking the record of having done nothing and getting the Nobel Peace Prize. I do want to take a couple of calls. We do have callers on, so I am going to get to them before we have to let you go, because I know you've got an appointment. So fix the border is job one. Without fixing the border, it's completely irrelevant.
Exactly. And the other thing, when I talk about promoting the path to citizenship that's already there, the problem is the bureaucracy that's in ICE in order to get people through. You went through it and you know. So my point is, let's clean up the bureaucracy. If that requires getting some updated technology in order to streamline it, make it faster, that's what we ought to do. That's working on the right problem.
Well, I'm not going to tell you right now because our time is limited, but if we have some time later on, I'll explain to you what I went through, including giving up my fingerprints 17 times, which is completely ridiculous. But I would make a plea, only one green card ever, either citizen or go home at the end of that. That would be my plea to you, sir.
Thank you.
I do want to take a couple of calls. Some people have been on hold for a long time. Let me go to Dean in Urbandale. You're on the Simon Conway Show with me and Herman Cain, Dean.
You served on the Federal Reserve Board of Kansas City.
Yes.
What would you do now?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, Dean. Listen for your answer offline.
First of all, I wouldn't raise the debt limit, because that's why the Federal Reserve today, they are basically inflating the money. The Federal Reserve actions today look nothing like what the Federal Reserve did back in the 90s when Alan Greenspan was the chairman of the Board of Governors and I served on the bank in Kansas City. So I would, first of all, depoliticize the Federal Reserve. It has become totally politicized in the arms of the administration, and that's not the way it was supposed to be. So I would fix the Fed, not end the Fed. If we would get back to doing what the Fed has traditionally done up until the last 4 or 5 years, the Fed served a very useful purpose for this country.
Okay, very good answer. Very clear answer is what I really mean. You've made some fairly strong comments about Muslims and how you wouldn't have somebody that wanted Sharia law in your administration. You actually went further than that. Could you explain that?
Well, the exact wording wasn't "I would not." Over the 40 years that I spent in business, I have always hired the best people for the job, irregardless of their race, their religion, or their gender, always. Only requiring, in this case, relative to the presidency, that they honor and support the Constitution of the United States of America first.
Okay. And your problem is that some people don't want to do that.
That some people don't want to do that. I believe American laws in American courts, period. And I don't apologize for that.
So when you look across the Atlantic and you see some of the stuff that's going on in the UK, for example, which I obviously know a lot about,
yes,
and some aspects, in fact, the Archbishop of Canterbury saying publicly that Sharia law is going to have to become part of British law. How do you feel about that?
I totally disagree with that. And I don't want this country to go down that road. The Founding Fathers set it up the right way. They got it right. It's called the Declaration of Independence, and it's called the Constitution of the United States of America. We don't need to rewrite them. We need to reread them and enforce the Constitution. I feel very strongly about that, so I don't apologize.
Herman Cain, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.